일단은 한국하고 그 비즈니스를 많이 하셔서 여러분 다 알고 있는 GM 코리아 대표이사셨고요. 마이크로소프트의 대표이사셨고요. 야후와 관련된 오버추어의 아시아 지역을 총괄하는 일을 하셨고요. 그리고 UCLA에서 공부를 하시고 하버드 MBA를 졸업을 하셨어요. 그래서 현재는 주한 미국 상공회의소에서 한국하고 미국하고 양국 비즈니스에 많은 도움을 주고 계십니다. 그리고 무엇보다 제임스님 그 회장님은 총장님께서 직접 추천을 하셔서 이분을 꼭 모셔서 학생들한테 좋은 말씀을 듣게끔 하자라고 말씀을 하셔서 진행을 하게 됐어요. 자, 일단 큰 박수로 환영을 하고 자 말씀을 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 발표를 해주시고 나서 질문을 많이 해주세요. 질문을 편하게. 프레젠테이션은 영어로 하실 겁니다. 그런데 한국말도 굉장히 편하시기 때문에 질문 한국말로 해도 되고 영어로 해도 되고 그렇습니다. 그래서 적극적으로 질문을 해주시면 정말 고맙겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 오늘은 제가 영어로 하겠습니다. You know, I'm very, very excited to speak at your school. I want to let you know that of all the schools that I have a chance to participate at, the University of Seoul is my favorite university in South Korea. And I'll give you some reasons in a little bit. What I want to do today is kind of walk you through my background, a little bit about what we do at AmCham, given the importance of U.S.-Korea relationship, kind of talk about why that's important and why it's important for you as students who will ultimately go out and get a job somewhere. You could work in a U.S. company, you could work for a Korean company, or you could work for a European company. I think today, after hearing my presentation, you might get a different perspective about South Korea and how American companies have really worked here. Plus, I want to walk you through some tips for success, whether it's during the job interview process, some of the companies that are available for you to work for, and so on and so forth. So I want to spend around 40 minutes in my lecture, and then hopefully after that, you guys can ask me any question you have. So let's try to make it very interactive, okay? So for the sake of timing, let me just walk through a little bit about me, okay? I am a U.S. citizen. So I was born in Korea. I left when I was 7 years old. So you can consider me a Korean, but I'm a U.S. citizen, okay? I have, 2 sons. They both graduated from USC in California. I'm also married, and you see a couple of pictures of tennis. So when I tell you that I really, really like the school, it's because I come to the school twice a week. Every Saturday and Sunday, I'm here playing tennis. So I'm very, very thankful for President Seo for allowing me to at least play tennis here, play with a lot of your professors as well. And I'm very happy to be part of your school. And I always have positive memories coming here. So I want to be extra helpful to anyone who is part of the University of Seoul. Okay? My background is very, very simple. I have, 30 plus years of professional experience across different kinds of industries. I came back to Korea, 17 years ago. So when I first came to Korea, I worked for Yahoo. So I ran the Yahoo business for South Korea and also part of Asia. And after Yahoo, I was the CEO of Microsoft Korea. And obviously Microsoft is the largest software company at the time and now a cloud company. And then after Microsoft, I joined GM, which is the largest foreign direct investment company in South Korea. 17,000 people that GM employs here in Korea. And then 3.5 years later, actually 3.5 years ago, I joined AmCham to be its full-time chairman and CEO. So I'll walk you through a little bit more about AmCham. But before I came to Korea, I worked at companies like AT&T, which I learned a lot about telecommunications. I also know the internet business, consumer products. So you can call me kind of a generalist. So for those of you who are not sure exactly what industry you want to be part of, take a look at what I did. I covered all kinds of industries. So if I can do it, you can do it. Okay? Let me walk you through what AmCham is all about. Okay? When you look at AmCham, we've been around for, 68 years today. It's the largest foreign chamber in South Korea. Okay? And when you take a look at the kind of companies we work with and the kind of people who we have on the board, it's really the who's who of all the iconic American companies. Okay? We have 800 plus corporations and affiliates that are part of AmCham, and we have 30 plus board of governors. So the picture you see are people who are involved with AmCham as a board of governors. So all the iconic U.S. companies, 3M, McDonald's, GM, Pfizer, Procter & Gamble, you name it, they're all part of AmCham. And I'm sure a lot of you students may one day want to work for, some of these companies that are part of AmCham. We employ a lot of people collectively, and because these companies are here in Korea, they want to hire Koreans who can really do a great job here in South Korea. So that's the reason why this network we have is very, very important. So what does AmCham do? We really have 3 missions. Mission 1 is to help American companies succeed here in Korea. Mission number 2 is to help Korean companies invest in America. So companies like Hyundai, Kia, SK, LG, they want to sell in America, so we help them do that. Okay? And then we also want to help U.S. small medium enterprises, what we call SMEs, come into South Korea. So that's what we do as an organization. And the 4 things we help companies is, number 1, marketing. So if a company wants to sell more in Korea, we help them. Advocacy is when they run into, policy problems with the Korean government. We get very involved with that. Third is information. Look at these board of governors we have. We have so much information on the different industries that we cover. So you guys heard the term fake news. Because we are dealing directly with CEOs, we minimize the fake news. And lastly, networking. So we allow a very nice way for networking. So for those students, we do have events sometimes that's geared for students. You should come and network and meet people. Because what you're going to find out is that most people find jobs through effective networking. Okay? No one's going to call you and say, hey, I have this great job for you. Nobody. It doesn't matter how good you are. Okay? So that's some of the lessons I hope that you would take away from this. Okay? These are some of the big companies that have invested in Korea. And again, I think the type of companies that are here, whether it's P&G, whether it's HP, right, whether it's GM, they're all the companies that you should have some aspirations to try to find a job with. Because these companies are here. You just got to have the faith, the passion, and the willingness to really go give it a best try. Okay? I talked about how we help Korean companies enter U.S. Well, these are some of the big brands, Samsung, LGs of the world, that are investing a lot in Korea, in the United States. And we help them. Okay? So for you students, this is probably a good primer on the kind of business relationship we have between U.S. and Korea. Okay? This is a very important slide. So this kind of walks you through why Korea is important to America and why U.S. should be important to Korea, purely from a business perspective. Korea is America's 6th largest trading partner. So it makes it very, very important, right? $61 billion worth of investment that American companies or America has made in Korea. Look at all these jobs that are created. So there's a lot of things that are going on, and even from the U.S. to Korea, you know, look at all the things that are going on. And this slide kind of summarizes some of those contributions that American companies have made to Korea, and vice versa. So this makes it a very, very powerful, you know, relationship between the two countries. So if any of you are interested in working for a U.S. company, you should really understand what this means. Okay? I think a lot of you know about something called Chorus FTA, which is a free trade agreement. This kind of gives you a quick summary of what that is, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it shows you that U.S. and Korea has one of the best free trade agreements, which will make this relationship between two countries over the long term very, very powerful. Okay? The other one you should understand is about what we call the trade deficit. And this is talking about goods, you know, manufactured goods as opposed to services. What this shows you is that, and you've heard President Trump say this before, or even the current, you know, President Biden, there's a huge trade deficit between countries now and the United States. Look at the trade deficit between China and the U.S. Look at these numbers, right? It's a huge number. $311 billion of trade deficit between China and the United States. What that shows is China is selling $311 billion more into the U.S. than the U.S. is doing to China. And this is a big concern for many in the U.S. and in the government, right? EU, Mexico, they're all very, very heavy trade deficit countries. But when you look at Korea, it's relatively modest. What do we have? It's $25 billion. Okay? It used to be much higher, but now it's much lower. So it shows you that Korea has been a good actor on trade with the U.S. It's a good relationship. Okay? But trade and services, and these are not manufactured goods, but things like, you know, professional services, like legal, accounting firms, and so on. There is a trade surplus between U.S. and Korea. So in other words, American companies are generating more revenue in Korea than vice versa. So it makes it a very healthy relationship between the two countries. Okay? President in the United States, Joe Biden. Biden, or Vice President Biden at the time, maybe 5 years ago. I thought he was a fantastic vice president. We expect to see him here in Korea, and we hope to have some good engagements. But the four things that he's really worried about is overall trade, China, right, North Korea, and the security alliance. In fact, tomorrow, the Secretary of State from the United States is coming to South Korea. Okay, he's in Japan today. So all the discussions are going to take place. Okay? Now, I want to talk about what it takes to be successful in Korea. And this is what a lot of you should know as you talk to American companies. So this gives you a pretty good flow of the difference in dynamics between U.S. and Korea. Take a look. The largest company in the U.S. is Walmart, and they represent only 2.6% of the GDP. The largest company in South Korea is Samsung. It's 17%. The top 5 companies in South Korea represent 50% of the Kospi Stock Exchange. In the U.S., it's a lot lower. Okay? Another one is Korea. We rely on trade for our survival. In the U.S., it's not, because it's very insular, right? And then lastly, everybody lives here in the greater Seoul area, whereas in the U.S. it's not. It's very, very scattered. Okay? This is a slide that I show to everybody who visits from the United States. And this is a slide that I think all the Koreans that work for multinational companies should understand. If we take a look at the cultural differences between the U.S. and Korea, it's very, very clear. Look at the U.S., right? We have a different kind of a culture. Okay? Look at things like diversity. in the U.S. When you go to a lot of cities in the U.S., they're not just one look or one race, right? There's no titles in the U.S. In the U.S., nobody calls me, Mr. Chairman. They call me James, right? Look at diversity. In the U.S., there's a clear separation between personal and work. At 5:36 p.m., most people just go home. Whereas in Korea, that doesn't happen. A lot of people hang out together, right? Look at age. In the U.S., age really does not matter. Okay? And the most important thing is what I call 7 degrees of separation. The U.S. is so big, you don't really need to know a lot of people. You just got to do it the professional way. But look at Korea. Pali mentality. Everybody knows that, right? Korean titles, school ties. In the U.S., there's so many good schools, and people come from all over the world. Who cares? It's what you do with your job that matters, right? Weddings and funerals. A lot of people come to weddings and funerals, but in the U.S. it's different. It's a very private affair. So these are some simple things that I think you should kind of understand as different kind of cultures. Okay? But you guys are all here in Korea. I think this is a very exciting time to be Korean, because look at the Korean wave, right? K-pop. When I was growing up, there was no K-pop. So I think K-pop itself created a huge, image improvement in South Korea. K-cinema, Parasite, right? What a winner. Even K-cuisine. I think more people are enjoying Korean food than ever before. And lastly, K-IPO. Last week's, IPO by Coupon have really elevated Korea's standing in the world. So that's why for you students, look at these 4. This should serve as an inspiration to what you do, okay? Obviously, Korea has become a real leader in innovation. Samsung has led the way. We should all be very proud that because of the 3 T's of corona testing, tracking, right? Tracing, it has really improved Korea's standing throughout the world, okay? And part of what people need to do when you're part of both societies now, especially here in Korea, is you got to start building the right bridges, right? And that's why these pictures kind of show that even myself, I have to do a lot. Whether it's media, whether it's business, culture. And that's what I think many of the students should really focus on for themselves as well. Okay? And these 3 companies are good examples where in Korea, CSR is very important. You need to give back to society. And that's what we always tell our American companies to do more of. That's why even at AmSham, we want to get a foundation that provides financial support for us. In fact, I'm so proud that for the past 3 years, we have provided scholarships for University of Seoul students. I believe we have given over 50,000 US dollars to Siri Daekyo. I forgot the number of students, but it's around it's 50 students so far in 3 years. So we're very proud that we are donating our our foundation capital to University of Seoul. Okay? And these are some of the companies that are doing well in Korea today. So please take a look at these companies and say, wow, I may want to work for some of these companies. Okay? The other one is COVID impact. Korea's done so well with COVID. If you take a look at the slide, this is the OECD countries. Korea had the lowest decline in GDP despite COVID. Right? Look how powerful this is. And I talk about this all the time as we talk to senior people from other parts of the world. Digital transformation. In fact, I think that all of you, doesn't matter where you wind up working for, you need to think about digital transformation. Even what we're doing today is digital transformation. Can you imagine if University of Seoul did not do digital transformation today? You guys would all be home. You guys would be learning. Professors would be home doing nothing, right? And that's just not effective. Digital transformation is key. Even at Amgen, digital transformation has changed our business model, where last year, despite the pandemic, we had the best year in the history of Amgen because of digital transformation. So all of you, whatever jobs you get into, you must think of digital transformation. That's the future. Okay? Now I want to walk you through, some tips for success, because I think this will help your career. For me, I've been a president of various companies for many years. Okay, does that make me special? No, but I've had a lot of experience, running businesses. Even before I came to Korea, I was the president of a company when I was very young. Okay, so I developed a system called Act to Win. And it stands for accountability, professor who's better at communications than someone who's not. So that's why communication is important. And third is teamwork. We all need, I designed something called Act to Win. And lastly, business is business. Business is about winning and losing. There is competition, whether we like it or not. So for me, I like to win. So that's why I devised a system called Act to Win. So how does that really work in the scheme of things? I have a framework. Okay? As you can see from my background, I ran many different companies. Okay? The first thing I do is I like to familiarize myself with the people who I work with. And one of the most important things I like to do is I like to take care of the bad apples. Okay? If there are troublemakers in the company, I like to figure out a way to get rid of them. Okay? Especially after you give multiple chances, because they become a little bit distraction. And also respect is very important. Okay? And I think that all of you can appreciate that whether you're very senior or someone who is junior, okay, there has to be a good, respectful, partnership. Okay? And then key success factors. I think that having the right KPIs, which is key performance indicators, is very important. Okay? That's why things like managing time is very important. I can honestly say that because I really respect being on time, I personally have never been late for meetings. And it's very important. Okay? You should always plan out what you want to do. So it's highly metrics driven, and that gives you a roadmap for success. And monitoring what you're doing is also very important. So if you want to go out and get the right job, you need to have a plan on how many companies you want to interview with, how many people you need to go see, and map it out that way. And then lastly, if you have the right people and the right team on board, it becomes very effective. Okay? This is a slide that I talk about called a blueprint for being successful. And let me walk you through kind of my example, right? When I came to Korea 17 years ago, I didn't know too many people here. I did not know, the business I was in. Okay? I did not speak Korean that well. Okay? But I also had advantages, right? Number one, I can really manage a business based on pure objectivity. That means I'm going to make a decision based on who is the best for the job. Okay? Keeping promises. Okay? I think making sure that you keep promises is also very important. Age and seniority does not matter in my world. Okay? For me, you execute on what you have planned, and when that happens, you become very good at what you do. Okay? I didn't have school ties here. So what does that mean? That means I'm not hiring my friends. or my family members, and no one can complain about that. Okay? So that's the type of thing that I think outsiders can bring into any organization. I know that there are a lot of women in this classroom today. I also believe in diversity for women. Okay? When I was running Microsoft, one of the things that I'm very proud of is Harvard Business School did a case study on diversity program that I did at Microsoft. So I think that many business schools are teaching this course using this case study. So hopefully one day you have a chance to read the Microsoft in Korea, Harvard Business School case. They're still teaching it in classrooms all over the world. Because I really believe in diversity for a lot of our women leaders. Okay? And now I want to talk about, I think all of you are looking for jobs after graduation. In fact, you should all look for jobs. Okay? Yeah, maybe you may want to go to graduate school, enter into other advanced programs, but still, if you're looking for the right job, I think these are the three things that I want to really remind everybody. Number one, you really have to be prepared. And I hate to say this, but there's 150 students in the classroom today. I would say only 10% of you are going to be prepared. Everybody else is just not. You don't even know what it really means to be fully prepared. Right? So I think that this is something that you should really, really, take a strong inventory of. In fact, I'll give you a good example. I had the head of Microsoft visiting me years back. He was the chairman and CEO of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer. We were visiting Samsung, and one of our people gave him an LG computer to bring with him. He was very upset. That just shows you that we were not prepared. Right? Those are the details that I'm talking about. If you're going to go interview for a job with Samsung, you should really not use an LG phone when you're there. See, that's what I'm talking about, being very, very prepared. Second is on your resume, or the way you sell yourself, there's something that you should all kind of understand about yourself. It's called first, best, only. If I'm hiring somebody, right? So how do you define best? You're first at doing something, right? You're the best at doing something, or you can do it. So you need to find out in your background, what are the areas that you really can say you have an FBO? First, best, only. Right? When people ask me, how do I go from working for an internet company to Microsoft, or from Microsoft to GM, a car company? And I did not know anything about the internet business in Korea, or digital advertising business in Korea. I did not. But I talked about my background as a business person, which allowed me to get that job. And how did I go from Yahoo to Microsoft? I'm not an engineer. I'm not a coder. I'm not some software guy. But I went and got the job at Microsoft and was there for 7 years. And then from Microsoft, how do I go from software to the auto industry? I'm not some manufacturing expert or some car expert, right? But I'm able to talk about first, best, only. Because at that time, I honestly looked at myself as being the best general manager or CEO for a multinational U.S. company in Korea, regardless of what industry, right? I may be the only one who may have run 3 big companies, right, in Korea alone, in different industries. So those are the kind of examples that students like you should really, really have to, focus on. And I know there's a comment here on don't forget the importance of following up. I wish this was a more interactive classroom setting, but a lot of the interview for jobs, the question I want to ask you folks now, I'll talk to you about it is, after you interview with somebody, or you meet someone who's very important for the job search, how many of you really write a thank you letter or thank you email? I asked the same question to a lot of other students in different classrooms, and in Korea, it's less than 5%. Maybe that system works in a Korean company like Samsung or LG, I don't know. But if you want to interview and work in an American company, you must follow up with a thank you email. Right? And I don't want you to look at it as like, hey, why am I doing it their way? It's because you want to work for an American company. If you don't interview at these companies. Go interview at a Korean company. But I'm giving you some tips for success on if you want to be successful selling into or working in a foreign company like, let's say, Microsoft or GM, you have to sell what you have to the buyer, the way they want to be sold. So that's why I think understanding, your audience is really, really important. Okay? I also think that when you're meeting with different people in different companies, there's not a lot of time. Elevator pitch, okay? You call it the elevator pitch because an elevator going from bottom to top just takes a small amount of time. So in that small amount of time, you need to be able to talk about things that are easy to tell, right? Easy to understand, and easy to repeat. So whatever you want to tell the people you want to impress, please get the elevator pitch ready. Okay? And when you are interviewing for companies, you should always have these 3 questions really answered well. Why me? Why this industry? And why this company? And these are very, very difficult questions to answer. Right? So let's say you want to get a job at Microsoft. Someone's going to ask you, hey, why do you want to work? Why do you want to work for Microsoft? Chances are you don't have your answer really, really ready. Or someone says, hey, tell me about yourself, and you're going to ramble. That's one of the hardest answers, or hardest questions to answer. Or why this company? That's why you got to be thoroughly prepared, before you embark on these kind of meetings. Because I've been around for a long time. I know when someone is not sincere, someone is just playing a game, or they're trying to, kind of distort the situation. Very easy for me to figure it out very, very quickly. But if you can answer these 3 questions with a lot of conviction, I think you have a very good shot. At least you have a shot, okay, to land that opportunity. Okay. I'm on social media a lot, so please follow us on social media. So now, in the time we have left, I'd like to open it up to the floor for Q&A. Okay? And if you prefer asking me a question in Korean, you can do it as well.
질문 하나 드려도 괜찮을까요?
예, 잠시만요. 우선 저 지금 김다은 교수님께서 중요한 회의를 가셔서 저희 이제 자유롭게 질의응답 진행할 거고 말씀하신 것처럼 편하게 한국말로 질문하셔도 되는데 잠시만요. 네, 이제 질문해 주세요.
약간 당사자가 관심 있었던 이문점인데 어떻게 해서 GM에서 일하게 되었는지에 대해서 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
Okay. So I think the question is, how did I get to work at GM? As I said before, I've had different kinds of experiences across different kinds of industries. When I was at Yahoo, We ran a very, very good business there, and I was promoted to run the Japan business as well. And then Microsoft. GM at that time was going through a transformation, and they were looking for a Korean American leader to help them with the transformation. And the way these jobs usually work, for just so that you know, is companies hire search firms, okay, global search firms, to say, hey, who is the best in Korea to possibly run this business? And they interview maybe 10 candidates or so, because they know who is out here, okay? And then you go through the interview process, and that's how things get done. Okay? But obviously there's a lot of candidates for these kind of jobs, and I'm sure they were looking for someone who had auto background, of which I did not have. But I have other things that were very important to me. So it's all about competition. I know who my competition is, and when you're interviewing for a job yourself, you're going to have competition. So it's how you win, how you position yourself, that makes a lot of sense. And I had a track record of success here before. Okay?
또 질문 있으세요?
저도 질문 있는데요. 되게 그 PPT에서 문화적인 차이 부분이 되게 인상적이었는데 혹시 그렇게 한국과 미국에 이렇게 번갈아 일을 하면서 문화적인 차이로 인한 좀 재미있었던 에피소드나 그런 갈등 상황이 있을 때 어떻게 해결을 해야 하는지 좀 궁금해요.
Okay, I think your question is more about, yeah, there were the two cultural differences between U.S. and Korea. When some things are kind of clearly mapped out, how do you address them, right? I think that's your question. Okay. I'll give you a good example. I took one of my junior employees to a breakfast meeting just today. Okay? And this person is 31 years old, doesn't have a lot of experience, but we met with the CEO of a large pharmaceutical company for breakfast. I invited him to breakfast so that he can learn. Okay? But at the meeting, he did not say anything. He was scared. He was concerned. He didn't know how to interject himself. Because his background is, hey, as the youngest guy in the organization, with the lowest title, he should just sit, listen, and not do anything. Okay? Maybe that's the Korean way, right? Because if you're not doing that, you might be considered 건방져, rude, right? 싸가지 없다, right? That could happen. But in the U.S. system, when you're 31 years old, you're not young anymore. When you're 31 years old, you could interject yourself. In fact, you could be 22 years old and still interject yourself. And I think that's the cultural difference that I think we should all learn. But the most important thing is you should understand who your audience is. In this case, he was with me, a Korean American, and he was with a gentleman from the UK. And the US guy like myself and the UK gentleman, we want interactivity. So I taught him today that you should really change how you act in a setting like that. And not as a way for me to be negative to him. It's just the way we all learn. Right? So cultural differences exist. You must understand what they are, and you must cater it to your audience. Maybe at the meeting today, if I was having breakfast with a Korean gentleman who was 65 years old or 70, maybe it's appropriate for the youngest guy to be quiet, take notes, and not be interactive. So that's the learning. Okay, next question.
대한민국이 다른 국가들에 비해 기업에 대한 규제가 조금은 심한 뉴스를 본 적이 많아요. 아무래도 노동자의 인권을 더 부상시키고 사고를 좀 줄이려다 보니 기업에 대한 규제나 조금은 그런 게 심해진 것 같은데 이에 대해서 제임스 킴 회장님께서는 조금 어떻게 생각하시는지 궁금합니다.
You know, that's a very good question. Okay, obviously I'm asked that question constantly. Okay? And you know, Korea does have its uniqueness, but every country in the world has its uniqueness too. But one thing about Korea that is really important is about accountability, where the CEO is personally for everything that happens in the company. And I think that's what you're referring to. So I'll give you a good example. If I'm the CEO of GM Korea, there's a bad scandal or a bad case in Busan, for which I had nothing to do with. I'm the one who's going to be in trouble as a CEO, as a deputy. Now let's take a look at what happens in the United States. Mary Barra is the CEO of GM globally. So if something happened in Los Angeles, Mary Barra as the CEO, there's going to be nothing happening to Mary Barra, unless she was the one who was personally involved with that situation. So that's the real difference between the cultural system in Korea and the US. So we have a lot of meetings with CEOs that are members of AmCham, and this is a very big concern, right? And now there are new laws in place where if an accident takes place and someone dies in a plant or a facility, the CEO has to go to jail as one of the penalties. And I think many people think it could be a real concern for innovation, because every CEO is going to be too cautious, too careful. This does not mean to say that we don't value safety. Of course, everyone values safety. But that's the pros and cons in working and living in some countries today. Okay. Next question. 질문 좀 해주세요.
저 질문이 있습니다.
네. 질문해 주세요.
네, 일단 좋은 정보와 발표 감사드리고요. 제가 궁금한 것은 인간관계에 대한 것인데요. 지금까지 정말로 많은 사람들을 만나오셨을 텐데 비즈니스를 함에 있어 사람들과 관계를 맺는 방식이나 이에 있어 알려주고 싶거나 대학생들에게 해주고 싶은 조언이 있다면 해주실 수 있나요?
Okay. I think that's a very good question. Obviously, I meet a lot of people. And if I was making the speech today, in person, I'd be meeting 150 students, right? I speak at a lot of conferences. I'm in meetings constantly. But, for me, respect is very important. Okay? So whoever I meet with, I start off on the premise of mutual respect. Okay? I never want to be disrespectful for anybody. Okay? That said, I'm also careful in the kind of meetings I go to, what I say, because there's the media. For example, in our meeting, in our discussion today, there's 150 of you on Zoom. You could be recording them. It could get out. But as long as I feel I'm saying something to you that I believe in, and it's not like I have to rehearse, I'm not reading a script, right? And that's kind of what I do. But I also think that the whole world has changed, right? With social media, things happen very fast. So my recommendation for people like you is be very careful, okay? When you take some actions, you should know that someone could hear, it could spread very quickly, right? And third, be a subject matter expert so that you can defend, what you want to talk about and what your true opinions are. And when you do that, I think you'll minimize any challenges that you might have. But nowadays, you know, with social media, you may post something today that 20 years from now may become a problem for you. So I think that you should always be careful in what you post. For example, for me, I use social media, but I only really use one. It's called LinkedIn, because it's a professional, you know, social, you know, network for me. And I only post things that are really relevant for, you know, for what I do at AM Shambo in the business world. So please be careful of what you do now. They can have ramifications in the future. You know, like in the U.S. now, they're going through confirmations for you know, one candidate for a big job in the U.S. just got nixed because of her past tweets. And I don't think she ever thought she was going to be nominated. So I think that's something you should be very careful of. Okay? Next question?
너무 어려운 질문 아니어도 괜찮으니까 편하게 해주세요. 마이크로소프트 어떻게 있어요?
저 질문 있습니다. 아까 그 PPT 내용 중에 이코노믹 디퍼런시스에서 대한민국과 미국의 뭐 GDP 생산을 담당하는 주요 기업들의 비율이나 뭐 대도시 그 서울 같은 데나 뉴욕에 모여 사는 그런 비율들을 보여주셨는데 제가 아까 정확히 잘 못 들어서 그런데 혹시 대한민국이 이렇게 미국과 많이 차이 나는 이유가 궁금하고 또 이러한 비율이 더 분산화되는 게 필요하다고 생각하는데 그렇게 되기 위해서는 어떠한 과정이 필요할지에 대해서 궁금합니다.
I think you're referring to the one slide on just the difference between U.S. and Korea from an economics perspective, right? I think I talked about how Samsung represents a big percentage of Korea's GDP. Walmart, I think, represented maybe 2.6% or so, and how everybody lives in the Seoul metropolitan area, whereas in the U.S. it's really, really scattered. Hey, this goes to show you that here in Korea, because everyone's here, competition can be much stiffer too. So if you can survive in Korea, you should have a lot of confidence to know that you can survive anywhere else. In fact, if you take a look at what happened in Japan years back, Japan was the #1 electronics supplier in the world. Do you know how they got there? Because in Japan, they had hundreds, thousands of electronics companies in Japan. They competed fiercely in Japan, right? And those who won in Japan entered the global stage. And that's how they won. And I think in Korea, it's very, very similar. Look at all these gaming companies here that have done so well. You know, all the Nexons and NC Soft and all these other companies that are doing so well. There are thousands of gaming companies that didn't make it, right? And I'll give you a story about Coupon. You know, I know Bom Kim, the guy who started, Coupon. When I was at Microsoft, he came to see me, I think it was around 10 years ago. He came to see me because I had a brand here in Korea. I know the social commerce business because of Yahoo. And I was a graduate of Harvard Business School. He is an HBS dropout. He dropped out after the first year to start this company in Korea. When I met him, he did not even have the name Coupon. The email address that I had from him was, his name plus hbs.edu. That's how he started 10 years ago, right? He asked me to be on the board of his company, and I couldn't because I was in Microsoft, conflicts of interest. But here's a guy who came here with nothing, and in 10 years, he's now, I think, become the second richest Korean in South Korea, all in 10 years. So that should give you a lot of inspiration that people like, Bom Kim, as an outsider comedian, can really make things happen. right? And the people I know, whether it's neighbor, I know, Pomsu Kim from Kakao Talk, right? Even him. I used to, get together with him quite often when I was in Yahoo. But he's had, 2 home runs, right? He started, I think, the gaming company called Han Games, which merged into Naver. That's why Naver is called NHN, right? Naver Han Network. And then he hit, another, grand slam with Kakao. But Naver is another good example. They're able to maintain the search position in Korea for such a long time. I said, these guys can do it. I think anybody can. It's not like they have any special, help. A lot of people think just because you're part of the Samsung network or LG, you're going to be successful, but there are good examples where they were not part of that. Okay. Next question. We just have time for a few more.
질문 하나 드리고 싶은데 그 한국 기업들 같은 경우에는 재벌을 비롯해서 좀 가족 경영 체제를 취하는 경우가 많잖아요. 그러한 문화에 관해서는 어떻게 생각하시는지 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Yeah. This is a very interesting, question. I didn't show you guys this slide today, and I think things are going to change. But I have one slide that I always talk about. It's called, inherited wealth versus manufactured wealth. In Korea, wealth represents like 70% from family money. Okay? In the US, it's 30%. Everything else is done by entrepreneurs. Right? And I think that's the reason why you're seeing the government talk a lot about social inequality. Because the rich is getting richer, which is what they call inherited wealth. Whereas in a place like the US, it's completely the other way around. Wealth is generated by entrepreneurs. So when people see an inequality with that, the government's going to step in and try to find ways to make it better. And I think you're beginning to see some of that in the US too, right? Where they want to create, more of an even playing field between the rich and the people who don't have a lot of money. And it's a very tough choice for a lot of countries as well on what's the right way to do it. Okay, next.
네, 질문이 있습니다. 이제 미국 회사가 이제 한국에 들어올 때 한국을 이해해야 되는 것처럼 마찬가지로 이제 한국 회사가 미국에 진입할 때 미국을 이해할 필요가 있지 않습니까?
네.
그렇다면 만약에 한국인 CEO가 미국에 진입을 하려고 할 때 어떤 점에 대해서 좀 조언을 해주시고 좀 이러한 미국의 어떤 점을 좀 이해해라라고 좀 조언을 어떻게 해주시겠습니까?
So I think your question is, if a Korean CEO wanted to go to the U.S., how did they do that? Is that the question? 그거야?
어떻게 이해하는 게 좋을지
미국을 어떻게 해야 되는지 코리안 CEO가
Korean CEO?
미국을 how to understand US market.
Ah, okay. When you work for a multinational company, for example, when I was the CEO of Microsoft or GM, we do a lot of work with regional headquarters, which is usually in Singapore. And then there's the US headquarters. Okay? For me, the most difficult challenge was getting a Korean to become promoted into a regional job or in headquarters. And a big reason is because of the cultural differences that I try to teach you folks earlier today. Number one, there are some language issues, right? But it's mostly not because of language or pronunciation or grammar. It's cultural. Koreans have a tendency to be more specific in the knowledge about a specific topic. I'll give you my example. In the past 17 years, Yahoo, Microsoft, GM, and Amgen. I'm not a domain expert in cars or a domain expert in engineering or software. but it's my ability as a general manager to look at the big picture and communicate. So if a Korean person wanted to lead in the U.S. or other parts of the world, you cannot just be a specific domain expert, because you're going to hire people that know this stuff, and then lead from the top. So my recommendation is to really get acclimated on understanding the cultural differences. Then I think you'll feel much better about how to get things done. I gave you that example of my employee this morning. He was wrong in thinking that you should just not do anything. He should have been more unnatural and said, yeah, let me interject myself. And if you want to be a successful CEO in the US, you have to do the same thing. Okay. We have time for one last question.
마지막 질문입니다. 다시 없을 기회예요.
제가 질문하겠습니다. 얼마 전에 그 쿠팡 같은 사례를 통해 이제 우리나라의 스타트업 기업들도 이제 외국 주식 시장에 IPO를 할 생각이 있을 거라고 생각하는데, 그 쿠팡이 매우 큰 가치를 평가받았던데 그건 우리나라 주식 시장의 기업들을 저평가하는 건지 여부를 알고 싶습니다.
I think that the reason why Coupon is doing so well is not just because of Korea, right? But what they did was they learned from Korea. This super fast delivery is something that other countries cannot do. But by taking what they learned here in Korea, expanding it abroad in the US and other markets, this is why their valuation has become so high. Okay? And that's the reason why I think Korea is, the population may not be big, but it's a great market to learn, test your ideas, and if you can make it in Korea now, you can make it anywhere. And that's my, my last closing comment for all of you students here. So hey, there's a lot, and I know that it's a tough market for jobs for many of you, but if you can really persevere, focus on FBO, first best only, and have this competitive advantage, I think you're going to do very, very well. Look at where Korea is at today. GNI per capita, $44,000 per person, versus what, $900 in 1950 or so. It's the miracle in the Han River today, and you guys are all part of it. Okay, so thank you for your time today. I wish you guys a lot of luck. Thank you.
너무 수고해주신 회장님께 다시 한번 감사의 박수 드리고요. 저희 창업지원단에서 감사패를 전달하는 시간을 가질 건데, 말씀드렸다시피 지금 김상순 교수님께서 굉장히 중요한 회의에 참석하고 계셔서 저희 손난주 대형역 팀장님께서 대신 진행하실 예정입니다.
감사패 중한 미국 상공회에서 회장 존스 기업께서는 평소 한국과 미국의 교류 증진에 힘쓰시고 경제 협력과 발전에 크게 기여해 오셨으며, 특히 특강을 통해 창업을 꿈꾸는 서울시립대학교의 학생들의 기업가 정신 함양에 크게 기여한 바, 그 뜻을 높이 드리고자 감사와 존경의 마음을 담아 이 패를 드립니다. 2021년 3월 16일 서울시립대학교 총장 서순탁.
그리고 기념품은 이게 화장품인데 그 시립대학교 생명공학과에서 노화연구소에서 연구해서 만든 화장품입니다.
아유, 감사합니다.
건강하시고
네.
젊은 피부 유지하십시오.
네, 감사합니다. 네.
그러면 학생들은 잠시 쉬었다가 4시 15분에 다시 화면 켜주세요.
아니요, 너무 감사합니다. 오늘. 네. 학생들 공연 잘 됐나요?
너무 반응 좋으신 것 같아요. 더 할 것 같은데 막 질문.
네, 질문이 제일 많았어요.
네, 여태 강의하신 분들 중에 제일 많으세요.
근데 이 친구들 영어들 다 하니까 다 이해하는
네,
것
다
같아요.
이해하죠.
이런 거 많이 들어야 영어들 좀 이렇게 되고.
네, 너무 강의셨어요.
이쪽 저기